Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. For every returning viewer, you are most welcome. And if you are a new viewer, it is lovely to have you with me. I'd like to mention that I am aiming to use the community section of my channel to share and discuss ideas, and I will of course endeavour to respond to comments and short questions beneath my videos as much as possible, but please do feel free to use the community section to post ideas or comments, and do feel free to respond to others if you have an inspiration. And while all of this progresses, I will be playing the part of de facto moderator. I'm also very happy that the channel continues to grow and would like to take this opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you like the content and feel so inclined. And also please do feel free to like and share. All in all, the support I receive on YouTube is valued. So let's get into this video, the title of which is I Am the Fusion, and I will explain what I mean by the fusion later. But before I do, I want to say that the titles of my videos, certainly recently and going forward, are thematic. And so if in future I upload a how-to instructional type video, I'll label it as such so that that's clear. But the titles of my Sunday uploads, certainly, and my metaphysical moments uploads, are thematic. And what I'm aiming for with these sorts of titles is that the broadness will inspire ideas in you that you will in turn share with me. In this upload, I'll be talking a little, so sort of introductorily, about our experiences as a product of our emotional state, which is something that is familiar to us as a concept. But here I'm talking about it in terms of how we use the fusion to guarantee our emotional state. Now, this doesn't negate our humanity. The human aspect will continue to live its normal, natural lives, but in such a way that the context is grander and in which we are better and far superior versions of ourselves. Ultimately, we will find ourselves exposed to experiences that transform our relationship with God and which will in due course make us sons in the esoteric sense. And the word son refers to a particular status within consciousness rather than gender or biological sex. The idea of achieving this lofty status of son is always going to be very appealing to people who enjoy the idea of possessing real power and who are interested in using it. So that's not to say that we don't all possess creative power. We all do, but some people will be aware of an urge and will be impressed on by an urge to participate in activities that go beyond the personal. So perhaps you're someone wanting to work in some local or national domestic capacity, or perhaps in some international capacity, and knowing that you have the ability to do so because of this status of son is bound to be a very powerful driving force. And I want to expand on that a little so that you're clear about what I'm talking about. In life, there are always people who seem to have privileges that we don't have, perhaps because we don't come from the right background or don't have the right connections or physical attributes. Well, instead of us watching our dreams go unfulfilled or being crushed under the weight of the unfairness of it all, we come to understand that all things are possible, even those things that feel very much out of reach. And this is because of the wonder-working power of consciousness. And then there is recovery. This is another thing that we derive from the status of son, this true holistic recovery from the harrowing and scarring ordeals that many of us have lived through. To know that we are able to reach the point at which, having activated whatever capacity that particular trauma came to teach us, we can completely erase the effects of the trauma. And of course, if you are urged to live in a much quieter, much more still and internal way, the quality of your life in that context is going to be exceptional. So I'm talking about all of the things that we derive from achieving this status of son. So this upload really serves to encourage, in the strongest possible terms, anyone who finds themselves floundering at a crossroads perhaps, or even disillusioned with the philosophy of positive mind metaphysics because things haven't worked out in quite the way they had hoped. And so the encouragement to you is that you persevere, because the reward to you will far exceed the investment you put in and any difficulty you may be facing now. So that's what I'm saying. I'm literally pointing the finger and saying, persevere, don't you dare give up. As I say, the rewards will far outweigh anything that is inconveniencing you now. So let's dive in. Those of you who've listened to me previously will know that I'm a strong proponent of the importance of our human mandate as part of the plan that God has for us and for all things that exist, which Neville characterizes as the great drama. And I mention that here because this outlook is more often than not at odds with the practice of manifesting in the way that it is most commonly explained. The sort of conjuring up of odds and ends, so money here and there, or relationships, or whatever it might be. And certainly that sort of thing has its place. In fact, Neville Goddard, who is the only teacher I consider my teacher, talks about this type of topical manifesting as a way to get the ball rolling and to introduce us to these capacities that we didn't know we possessed while we were asleep in the automaton condition. But it doesn't end there. Once we've discovered the relationship between our feelings and our lived experiences, in other words, the essential nature of consciousness, we are supposed to mature. And as Neville Goddard says, move on to higher and higher levels. And this evolution, which you can read about in his lecture, The Seven Eyes of God, and I'll link that in the description box below, talks exquisitely about our relationship to God the Father. So what happens, as I understand, and I remain steadfastly open to new and deeper revelations, is that we go from an awareness of the I am, when we first start to use our imagination consciously, to an awareness of self, the dimensionally greater self that is, and how it functions, to an awareness of the relationship between ourselves as emanations of God and our human aspects, to an eventual incorporation into the body of love, and ultimately our resurrection. And what happens as this pattern unfolds is that our human experiences grow proportionately richer and fuller and more meaningful and more sublime. We're suddenly privy to things we didn't know existed before, and all of the trauma of life dissolves, which makes perfect sense if you think about it. Now, as we move on to fusion, I want you to consider for a moment your frailty as a human being. So just think about yourself as a human being, and your frailty, your impermanence, your limited time, if you'd like. And if you were somehow able to conjure up all of the things that as a human being you felt you needed, so money, a house, a relationship, and so on, and having done that, having reached the pinnacle of success, you found that your life was to be cut short in its prime, then what would that say to you about all of the things that you accumulated, especially if these were things that you felt you had topically manifested? So I'll manifest this, I'll manifest a car, I'll manifest a house, I'll manifest a job. And you do that, you achieve that, and you feel, wow, I've done it, I've arrived. What would you think about all of those achievements, all of those accomplishments, if you discovered that your life was to be cut short? To me, that suggests that the accumulation of earthly possessions and accolades serves a purpose that transcends my human life. And it would then follow that my human life had significantly more meaning than I, through the pursuit of those things, attributed to it in the first place. In Luke chapter 12, verse 20, in the World English Bible translation, it says, "But God said to him, 'You foolish one, tonight your soul is required of you. The things which you have prepared, whose will they be?'" And this was talking to a man who had increased his wealth inordinately. So there is a question of how we interpret the desires of God, this urge to have things, to possess things, to achieve things. How we interpret these desires and isolate them and take them out of context without considering who the fulfillment of our desire requires us to be, or how the fulfillment of our desires will change the roles that we have been mandated to play. Well, the fusion answers these questions. It is the meaning of life simplified. It is knowing your purpose and the reason we receive desires and what happens when we consent to their externalization through us. And all of this knowledge then frees us to live as fully as we possibly can within the time allocated to us. In his lecture, The Knowledge of God, 1968, Neville says, quote, "The creative act on the highest level is an embrace, a complete fusion of the two, where one melts into and becomes one with the other," end quote. Now, the wonderful thing about this is that this particular fact is foundational, even though Neville was using it in a particular context. And that means that it can be extrapolated to apply to literally any two things. So you and someone else, you and something else, you and God. But for me, more important than this is whether we take this on as part of our psychology and make it our approach when it comes to how we express God, through our lives. And this isn't religiosity in any form. It is much more expansive than that. So if I read the quote again, it says, "A creative act on the highest level is an embrace." Now, the creative act refers to conception and birth. Okay, so on the highest level, it is complete fusion. How exciting is that? I personally believe that it's really challenging to make the switch from manifesting in the way it tends to be characterized to being one, to fusing with a particular construct of consciousness, like the state of wealth or the state of health, etc. But what happens as a result of this fusion, of this embrace, which means surrender, and I won't go into all the saucy details, is that you're going to be performing these whole life transformations that Neville talks about so fondly, and you're going to find yourself living in an entirely stable and an authentically authoritative way. So this is real bona fide living head and shoulders above the crowd stuff. And if you're at all perplexed by what I'm saying here, that's quite all right. These things happen in sequence. So continue to exercise your imagination, continue to test the relationship between your two aspects of self, your human form and the personage of your imagination, until you feel ready to embrace this idea of fusing with states of consciousness instead. Exercising the use of your imagination will teach you the spiritual language of emotion. So I don't look down on it in any shape or form. It's something I do occasionally dip into for specific reasons. And doing this will reveal hidden truths about life. And once you've reached unity with these aspects of self, you can then progress to conscious awareness of your unison with God. So how do we fuse, and what does being this fusion mean to us? And I'll use the answers to these questions to wrap up this presentation. Firstly, we fuse by completely surrendering to a construct of consciousness, whether that is the state of health, wealth, success, whatever it might be. And we surrender to such an extent that it becomes our total perspective. Now, I mentioned earlier on, I'm not going to mention all the saucy details, but surrender is in the context of it being a generative act. And remember, the human typification of that is the intimate act between consenting adults. But we want to surrender to the state to the extent that it becomes our total perspective. So let's say that you're fusing with the state of health because you or someone you love has suffered ill health. Total surrender to this state or fusion with the state is achieved this way. First, you're going to have to make a commitment within yourself, and that's something you'll know how to do. You will have committed to things in the past, and it's the exact same internal promise. And then you're going to need discipline, a real stick-to-itiveness, and finally, dedication to standards of excellence. So those are the ingredients: the decision, the commitment, and the discipline. So it's a straightforward process, but you are going to have to be mature in your approach because it might not be easy. You're also going to have to pay attention to when you're performing this task. That's to say, how you started off, because it's being done by your imagination, who is the subjective or your dimensionally greater self. So you don't have to attend to what's going on. Rather, the work is ensuring that your human aspect is playing its part. So that's what's going on here. This means that you cannot, on the human side, give room, whether in thought, in attitude, in deed, or whatever it might be, to anything that does not conform to the ideal expression of the state. So Neville says that this is true down to the minutest detail. He said that we cannot spare a moment's thought in contemplation of anything that contradicts the perfection or the completeness of the state. In this example, the state of health. Now, what happens with the human aspect is that it tends to chaos. So we're still using the state of health as an example. While you've made this commitment to fusing with the state of health, it's going to try and push back with aches and pains and symptoms and diagnosis and prognosis. But you must disavow the evidence of the senses and immediately evoke the feeling of oneness with perfect health. And you can use any method you find effective, whether that is metaphysical prayer, if you're not yet able to evoke specific feelings at will, or asking your dimensionally greater self to transmit the requisite feelings to you. And you must do this until the state of health is your predominant natural mood. So I do hope that's clear. If there's any aspect of this that's a little confusing, do stop, rewind, listen to it again, and feel free to post any questions below. And I said that as I was saying it, I kind of felt, I think some people may struggle with that a little bit, but it's really quite straightforward. So you make a decision about the state you're going to fuse with, and that's a result of being aware of what's being impressed upon you. So if you suddenly become aware of a desire for perfect health, you're going to fuse with that state by saying, yes, I agree to fuse with this state. And then on the human side, all that you're required to do is to address any pushback that you get from your human aspect. That's what I'm describing. You're going to be doing this throughout the course of your day. So that's to say, having made the decision to fuse with the state of health, for example, your dimensionally greater self, as I was saying, has been given consent by your human aspect to transmit the state of perfect health to you. So you don't have to sit down and think about things. As I say, you go about your normal, natural business, and as the pushback happens, you resolve it until the human aspect loses the fight and subjects itself to your dimensionally greater aspect. Now, once this is achieved, you won't have to think about your health anymore. The ideal expression of health will infuse every aspect of your existence. This doesn't mean that you'll just be healthy or you'll eat healthily or do exercise. No, it means everything consistent with good health will be yours. So you'll be living free, F-R-E-E. You'll have the very best resources available to you. You will have financial abundance. You'll have time to pursue the things that induce feelings of well-being. Your experiences will be richer and more supportive, and on it goes. Added to this, the fusion with the state will be an entry point and the space from which you start to receive knowledge and wisdom from the Father, because you will have successfully subjugated your human aspect. You will have changed your life. And these are skills that wonderfully you cannot unlearn. And so it's the same for the state of financial abundance or for loving relationships. There's always a far wider context to these states than we as human beings ever consider. So do you see, I'm encouraging you not to think about manifesting things here and there, which perhaps don't fit in with the wider context of your lived experience, but rather fusing with a state which contains within it all of the things you could ever think you could want, and then some. Remember, the ideas of God for us are always far superior to the ideas that we as human beings have for ourselves. And that is really all there is to it. You become aware of the state you wish to fuse with, you make the decision, and the process begins instantly. In fact, the moment you determine to change your life in this way, all hell will break loose. But rejoice in that, get aroused by that, because it is the purest signal that the process has successfully begun. Now, as human beings, we have a way of wanting to check. We ask, how do we know something has happened, etc.? Well, you won't need to check the fusion, check on this sort of process of the fusion, because it will be evident. And that's where the maturity comes in. Only children really feel uncertain about things in this way. Have confidence in yourself. In 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11, in the NIV, I think it's the New International Version translation of the Bible, I do believe, don't quote me on that. But anyway, 1 Corinthians 13, 11, in some versions says that when I was a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child, now I'm a grown up, I put the ways of childhood behind me. So have confidence that all the evidence you need is the expression of your life. And as for how long things are going to take, well, that too will be covered by how long it takes for things to change externally. And there's always a chance that you won't even notice. The new state will be so natural to you. In fact, it will probably take other people telling you that you've changed, or trying and failing to remind you about how things used to be, how you used to be. That happens to me all the time. So give it a try if you feel ready to. Spend the time you need to be clear about what is being impressed on you, what state you're going to be fused with, and enjoy the change of status that such an achievement inevitably brings. Thank you for listening. Do feel free to ask short questions below and join in the community section for fuller discussions. This has been an original Kate Jagede presentation. Until we are together again, stay phenomenally you.